Okay, so welcome to our webinar series. We put on these webinars for our customers every second week, and today's topic is bill of materials and work orders. And I'm going to start off from kind of the beginning on creating a bill of materials. And you can certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat, and we'll get to those questions. So I usually do a presentation followed by a Q&A. So I hope everybody can now see my screen. I'm looking at the dashboard, the home screen of order time, and I see a calendar event here, and I can see here that we created an event associated with a particular work order. So the way we did that is simply we created a work order, and then we created an event for that, which is actually still going on. So once it's finished, it'll go to the actually it already is completed, so that's why it's in the activity history. So what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of lay the groundwork a little bit for what a bill of material is all about. Go to the production workflow or production cycle and kind of have an understanding of how the system gets put together. So a bill of materials is a recipe. It's basically a list of components that go into raw materials or components or inputs, cost inputs, that go to build a single unit of a finished product. A single unit of a finished product. Okay, so we're always working in terms backwards into the primary, to the unit of measure of the finished product. So let's go ahead and create a new item that has a bill of materials. And when we create an item that has a bill of materials, it has a certain type. Okay? And the type of the item is an assembly. So if you want to categorize, have different categories for your bills of materials, you would create one or more item groups that have an item type called assembly. Okay? So I have a few item groups over here. I have assembly group, I have assembly item. I'll just change this to finished good. But you can see they all share one thing called the item type, which is a system parameter that that basically tells the system that this item should have a bill of material. Okay, this item should have a bill of material, and this is another type of or another item group or category called men's and women's serum. But you can see that the item type is always assembly. So all these item types, whether it's assembly group, finished good, all these item groups, whether it's assembly group or finished good or men and women serum, all have the type of assembly, and that's what makes the system give it a bill of materials. So when I create a new item, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new item, I want to pick the group that has the bill of materials. So here's that one over here. And then I'm going to give my item, so there's the group, I'm going to give my item a new number. So that number, I can use the automatic number sequencing that we have in our system, or I can just type in a unique name. So we'll just call this FG009. Okay. And there is the unit of measure that we're going to use. We give it a sales description. and a price. We can start off with the price so that we can leave that blank for now. And the purchasing, the cost is going to be rolled up from the sum of its components. So we'll just leave that as is. Okay, so that's really all we need. If this finished product also you want to track serial numbers or lot numbers, for example, it's a chemical or it's some kind of food product or beverage product or pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, or piece of machinery, cell phone, computer, anything like that, you would say that this item has, that you want to track the lot or serial numbers of those items. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And when I save that, automatically it has a bill of materials structure. Okay, so now that I've created the item, I can go ahead and press Edit Bill of Materials, and I'm going to get to where I can start entering the components in to my bill of materials. Now, there are two ways to find a bill of materials. You can either filter the items list by type, by group, or by assembly type, or I can go to a listing of all the bills of materials that I have. All right, so here is a listing of all the bills of materials that I have in the system, and there is the bill of materials. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that bill of materials, and I'm back to my bill of materials editor. And this bill of materials is, like I said, is a recipe. It's going to be used over and over again in work orders that actually build this stock. So as you can see, it just kind of has one step, and you can. So the idea of a step is basically to have a large bill of materials broken up into multiple logical steps of operation. And you set up your steps in the profile list. So where to find the profile list? You go to the management of the settings and kind of your admin panel, which is in the top right corner, the company name. So I'm just going to kind of click and open that. And then I get to my admin, and I want to go to my profile list. I go all the way over to production, and I see steps. Okay, so I can create as many steps as I want. So for example, the picking step, which I changed the name of it, usually it's called default. This has a description that says, pick raw materials, and it can happen in any one of the locations. Okay, so if you have outsourced steps, for example, weld, I can say that it happens in a completely different location. Okay, so that's the way you're kind of able to identify, where your inventory, where your work orders are in a particular sense with using steps. So we'll just go back to this bill of material, and I add a step. So before, okay, so there is a question, and I'll answer it right away here. The question was, if we have multiple steps, do we have to create a new location? You don't have to create a new location. You can use existing locations. It's basically where the inventory is, where the raw material is at that particular step. So when you have a step that uses another location in order to consume that inventory at that location, that inventory has to be at that location first. Okay. All right, so we'll just go back here, and we'll just add another step here, and we'll just add cutting. So here we just put in, what typically, how much time a step would take, and you have different units of measure here, so you can just put in a value here, and let's say it takes 15 minutes to do this cutting step, so I can put that, and it means it's active. Okay. So I have the steps here, and at every step I can put in different components. I can edit the step. So if I want to edit the step, I can just click on the right here, right? I can remove the step. All bill of materials must have at least one step, so you can't delete the originating or one step. So it has to have at least one step. So I'll put this one back in here. Now the little box over here allows you to move the steps around. Allows you to kind of reorder them. So I just kind of moved them around. All right. So that's what that little button is. All right, and of course, just like any other list, by default, the steps are always ordered by the line number. And and we can't really change that. That's one of the things that we can't change here. All right, so now to each step, I want to add different. I want to add different components. So the way to add a component is basically to click the Add button. Once you highlight the step that you want to use, you click the Add Component button, and then you basically pick one of the your items that you want. Now, this line instruction is not the actual description of the item. It's a instructions to basically to whomever is going to read this bill of materials as to what to do with this particular component. So you can put any character, any number of characters here, like for example, line up unit to left, right? And let's say we're going to use one quantity per. All right. So now we start off and we see that as we added this component, we have a standard cost here. Cost for this component for one each, which is $22, and it starts to build up the cost of this entire bill of materials. So we'll just continue to add a couple of components here. Okay. Now you'll notice here as well, there's another thing that it says is one time. And the quantity per, when we have the quantity per, and we do a work order, it basically said, let's say I want to create 10 of the finished product, it'll multiply the quantity per by 10. So we'll need 10 of this component, unless you say that it's a one time. And a one time is basically used for things like setup, things like that. So you can put that in as a one time. All right, we're going to add one more component here. This time I'm going to add something called liquid ice. And liquid ice is a little bit different in that I buy this in kilograms, but we use it in ounces. And in order to achieve this, I set up what's called multiple units of measure. So if we go to this item over here, you'll notice that I have a unit of measure set which says kilograms to pounds. So I'm going to go to my my admin here real quick and show you how I set that up. So I basically enabled unit of measure sets in my preferences, and then I set up a unit of measure set called kilograms to pounds, and the primary unit of measure is kilograms, so we inventory it in kilograms. We buy it in pounds, so I have a purchase as in pounds, and I have a used as in ounces. Okay. So this is the way I set up this unit of measure set, and in my bill of materials I have now the ability to have that reflected in ounces. And as you can see, as I'm editing this, so let's just kind of make that a little bit more. Let's say we need 40 ounces, and it'll increase the cost. So you can see here is as we're adding items, it's kind of calculating what the cost is, what the margin is, and you can kind of play with these with your price here or your margins to calculate what the price should be. So let's say I want a $90 margin, it'll give me a price, or I want a certain margin percentage, it'll calculate the price for me, okay, and the markup as well. Now, most of these items that I've added here so far are parts. Are there just inventory, just regular inventory parts? I could add other bills of material on here as well. And that's called a nested bill of materials. When you have one bill of materials into another bill of materials, that's when you have what's called a nested bill of materials. And when we have this concept of the phantom bill of materials that fits in, okay, the phantom bill of materials. So I'm just going to go to my bill of materials list, and I'm going to take a look at a filter here where I want to see is phantom bill of materials. I want to see all my phantoms. So this I guess just an example of a phantom bill of materials that I created, and it just has kind of a one machine. Put in one machine. This phantom, basically, I just check this box, and when I do a work order for a phantom bill of materials, it gives me the opportunity to flatten the entire structure. I'm going to show you that in a second. So I'm going to go back to this bill of materials here, and I'm going to add that machine as one of the components. Okay, so there it is. We add one. And okay, and I'm going to put that just so kind of remind me exactly what we can do with a bill of materials that's in another bill of materials. Another type of component I can add is any service item or a non-inventory part or other charges, and that is when you want to kind of include a fully landed cost type of bill of materials. So if you have labor that goes into an item, I can add. So I've created this item called repair labor, which has a quantity, which basically is $25 per hour, the unit of so it takes whatever number of hours, and it'll add that, and it'll put in the non-part costs as well. So that will build up the cost, and this cost will go into the bill of materials and be included into the cost of the item when you create it. Okay. So that's the way to include labor, and you can include other inventory or other non-inventory and other charges as well, like rent, components. If you have things like thread that you use that you don't really want to track the quantities of that, you would set up a non-inventory item and include that in here as well. So you can add as many components as you want. Now I'm going to click on the other step, and as you can see that if I click on that step, it's basically making my bill of materials into two logical steps. One of them is picking, one of them is cutting, and I might have other components in here as well. Okay. Now you also have, in addition to the line item instructions, you also have a global global instructions below for the entire bill of materials. So this is just free-flowing text that you can add, you know, step 1, step 2, in terms of what's, you know, what to provide in terms of instruction to whoever's building this bill of materials. So that's doing that. So this is kind of an example of setting up a bill of materials. I know there's a question. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Let me see. Okay. All right, we'll get to the Q&A in a second. All right. So now that I have this completed bill of materials here, I'm going to show you a little bit about creating a work order now. So in order to create a work order, I can go to I can just go to create new, and I'm going to create a work order. So all my bills of material are here. I just have to basically select that one, and then I want to start by saying, so here's the instructions that get copied over. One other thing that I might want to do is in the bill of materials, there's a field called the build point. So I'm going to put in you know, this is kind of like a reorder point, so you can kind of determine, use the reorder analysis to kind of build the bill of materials as well. So you can do that as well. Okay. And then I also have this field called the make time. So let's say this is in days. So let's say it takes me, you know, a full week, including weekends, to build that. So I'm going to save that. So there's a couple of other things that you can add directly to that. So that's kind of the build point, the max quantity, and the sales lead time. All right, so back to creating the work order now. Notice what the build time did. It automatically added 7 days to my promise date. Okay, so we know that if we enter a work order today, that it's going to take 7 days to build. All right, so that's what the build point does. And then you can also add custom fields. So, you know, if you feel more comfortable using custom fields as opposed to the steps, which are a little bit more complicated, that can be done as well. You can also, and I'll show you another thing that you can do using the statuses. So here's a memo. Right, so we're going to produce 10, and when we do that, basically all the components get multiplied. The quantity per gets multiplied, and you have a couple of columns here. You have the required, the remaining, and we also added a column called available. And the column called available is not a standard column, but you can add it going to your columns list and adding them. I've also added track lot and serial numbers. I want to see which one of my components have a serialized item. Okay, so there's a couple of options. So I mentioned that one of these components is a phantom bomb, and the phantom bomb is used with the flattened structure. So I'm just going to show you real quick what this does. So when I flatten, as you can see, I no longer have that bill of materials inside this work order. In fact, now I only have the machine itself, which is the component of machine a machine. Okay, so what it does is basically takes all the components that are in, strips out the structure, and then puts that into the work order. Okay, so that's one option that you can use. So I'm going to create another work order here. So create new work order, and I'm going to show you another thing that you can do when you have nested bill of materials. All right, so we'll just do 2 of those. Now the other thing with this bill of materials here, I don't have any in stock, right? There are none available, and I want to create. I don't want to do a flatten. I actually want to go through a work order to build this bill of materials. So one thing I can do is I can create the work order. The other thing I can do is I can create a linked work order. Or I can use this function called the drill down. And the drill down will make all the kind of nested work orders all the way down. So if this bill of material had another bill of material, had another bill of material, it would recurse through all the bills of material structure and create all your work orders. By default, this function, the drill down function and the flatten function are not visible. In order to make them visible, you would again go to your preferences, your production preferences, and you would enable them. Okay, so here's all enable drill down, enable flatten, which I have enabled. So when I flatten a work order, or when I drill down a work order, it will create automatically a linked work order for the machine. All right, so now I have a work order. So there it is, that work order for the machine. Okay, and there's the steps that I need in that particular work order. And all right, so that's another way of creating work orders, pretty quickly. All right, so let's start with the work order that just flattened one that has just components, not other bill of materials. All right, so I want to push this work order along, and I want to be able to order the stock I need for the work orders. So the first thing I generally do is I allocate. Now I can allocate the entire work order, or I can allocate individual steps within the work order. If I want to allocate, and allocating basically reserves the inventory for this work order. It doesn't take it out of stock, but it makes it unavailable for other work orders. So I can click one of them to allocate it. So allocate one step at a time, all right? And as you can see, as I'm allocating, it'll try to start, allocating the quantity, but certain of these are what's called remaining. That means that this step is still waiting. Waiting means that not all the components have been allocated. Or I can click that one unit and allocate that completely. Now, in this particular case, I don't have enough stock to go. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that we can do in terms of the work order that are different than other types of system. Firstly, I can delete any one of these components and replace it with another component. So I can easily add another component to this. Okay. All right. So I know that this one's in stock, and I've added it. And I can edit these components right here if I wanted to. All right. So I can edit right in line. It's called inline editing. So I can edit the quantity like so. I can delete a component, and it doesn't affect the original bill of materials. It only affects this particular work order. The other thing I can do is I could allocate more than what we actually required. So let's say I use more, I can say that we use more, and you can see here that the remaining is negative, meaning that we over applied it. The reason maybe we destroyed one, or for whatever reason, and what's going to happen then is that the unit cost for this particular work order is going to be higher than the standard. That's all that's going to happen, but it's going to consume that extra piece of inventory. Okay. So if you do purchase orders by work order, at this point, I can do a link PO that will kind of give me everything that I might need to purchase for this particular bill of materials, and we'll just add the same vendor here, and we'll go ahead and create that purchase order. Okay. So going back to my work order, now I have a couple of other links, and this one in particular to a purchase order. So I'm just going to go ahead quickly and approve my purchase order, receive my purchase order. Okay, and change the status to received. So once I do that, I should be able to kind of go and completely allocate this. Well, there's one of them that's still this one, which is the machine A, which is the wrong one. Okay. So let's go back to the dependency here, and let's just go quickly create this, finish and create this particular work order, so we can finish off the other work order. So I need two of them. I only have one of them in stock, so I'm just going to check here what I have on order, see if I can receive any of those. I don't. Alrighty. So let's just receive it in with a quick receiver then. Okay, this is a serialized item, so I can just start scanning in my serial numbers here. So I'm just going to receive a bunch of them. All right. Okay, so now I've received those. I'll go back to this work order. Okay. So because this is a lotted item, before I finish it, or serialized item, before I finish it, I have to introduce the two serial numbers. So that's the first one. That's the second one. Okay, so once I have the quantity produced, I can go ahead and just finish that. All right, so that finished. I don't have to finish one step at a time. All right, so once that's done, once that work order is done, it'll create the quantity, and I can complete. Now, at any point, I could have put this in production. So I could have put one step at a time in production, or the entire work order in production. In order to put one step at a time in production, I open up the step, I edit the step, and I change its status to in production. So when I do that, now I can monitor on my work order list each work order and what the current step is. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and back into here and finish that step and put the next step into production. So I can do that one step at a time. And so we can see and then you can filter the work order list, show me the current step, that is cutting. Okay, so I have a few of those, including ours. Now I can also change the status from the work order list. So for example, let's say, and this is a global status, let's say I wanted to change the status from this work order list. I would use this, so I can do that en masse as well. Now since this doesn't have a lot number, I can just come in here and press finished, and it'll create. So at this point, I finished my work order, and all the components have gone out of stock, and they're now two in inventory, two of the finished good in inventory. Okay. Alrighty, so there's a couple of reports that you can use for the bill of materials. So we have a bill of materials report, and this basically, so if I look at, and I'm going to filter, I'm going to customize this report, and I'm going to filter the item ID, and I just want the FG, the one I just did. And so here's the bid, the total cost, all the components, cutting. I can also, I'll just show you real quick here. If I wanted to separate the steps as well, I can make the steps into a section. So now I have the cutting step and that. Let me just sort by. So actually, don't want the step name, I want the step line number. Interesting. All right, so that's that. Now I can also, one of the other things we can do is we can flip this around, and instead of making the item name the section, or the step the section, I can make the component the section itself. So let me go and add the component up here, make that the section, and remove this filter. So now we have a report that basically tells me if I have a component, which bill of materials they're using. Okay, so you can save that as a new report. Call it components used in. So that's a very useful report. The other reports are regarding all the work order reports. So we have our open work order reports here. So these are all the open work orders, current step. The production dashboard basically mostly works off of work orders. So these are the open work orders. If I click into here, and then this is kind of a count by work orders and different statuses. Count by work order by different items, and then what's been produced and what's actually used. So this report is all the components that have been consumed on the work orders over 12 months. So if you want to know what's been consumed, you can start with this report over here, and then you can customize it. So if I wanted to do last month, and now the report is It's obviously different. All right, so I'm going to open it up for, I know that there's some questions, and Michael has been going through some of these questions and answering them. Are there any other questions that you can think of right now? Okay, I think kind of a general discussion on just getting, creating the work orders, creating the bill of materials, some ideas about what a flatten does, what a phantom bill of materials, a drill down. There are other things on the work order that if you have any questions and if you want any topics, kind of more deep dive into work orders, we can definitely do another session for that. So if there's no questions, thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.